So we had some chats, and we had the opportunity to experience the first inaugural Energy Thought Summit. And I would encourage everybody that is coming in to come into the front. Please come to the front. I want you all to have a dialogue, have a great Q&A with these folks. We're going to have a long, extended Q&A. I want us to have a final, engaging dialogue about all the problems, about all the challenges, and what are the solutions. And so with that said, one of the things that we discussed, and I encouraged and suggested to the panel members was, you've been here for a day and a half. Maybe we should, go to many sessions, take notes, and kind of give us a rendition of, in a summary for the crowd to hear what we have heard, what we thought was important, maybe some of the people that we met. So I'll start with you, John. You've been here. You've been in many conferences in your life. You are a rock star, one of those energy gods that I talk about. Tell me about ETS, the last 2 days. What do you think?
Well, I've only become a star, at least in my son's eyes, now that I'm on the marquee with Wozniak. So that was the only thing that really, Chairman of FERC and all that meant nothing to them. But being on the same marquee as Steve Wozniak was like, wow, Dad, you finally made it.
Well, I'm glad we could help with that.
Yeah, you put me over the top with my 22-year-old and 24-year-old sons. They're like, oh, okay. But, it really has been a fascinating conference. I didn't get here as early as I wanted to yesterday because my plane was a little late, but I saw your last session. I've seen a number of sessions today, and of course the session I participated on. The interesting thing that I've seen here is we've got a lot of clouds, There's the home management cloud, and there's the distributed energy cloud, the microgrid cloud. There's, all these, the standards cloud. They're all, cybersecurity cloud. And somehow we need to get all these clouds talking to each other. We talk about all the devices talking to each other. What I really took out of this is really we need to get all these parts coordinated into some kind of unified model, overarching umbrella and whole is really what I think is what I took out of this. That we've got all the parts. The parts are all out there. It's now someone somewhere needs to figure out how to do the synthesis to synthesize these things. Maybe it's NRG. I don't know. Somebody
orchestrate it all,
who can put it all together, or Southern California Edison. Maybe it's somebody. Maybe Austin's already done it. And I was really impressed with Austin this morning in listening to Larry and what he'd done, and Doyle and what Doyle's done down in San Antonio as well. And they've done some tremendous things with the munis there, and their ability to, within their own jurisdictional cloud, to do things. But now we need to get this out to the whole grid, and that's what we really need to do.
Right. Thank you, John. George, what do you think? ETS 2 days, you're a glove thrower in the world, many conferences. What do you think?
My head's spinning, but let me start by really thanking you, Andres. I think you've done a marvelous job pulling together a very diverse group. And the format was, I think, really brilliant to have conversation about these issues as opposed to static presentations, which we normally, 50 times we've heard the same thing. So this has been very different. To me, the complexity of this in the United States is what really comes out to me. In the last session, I contrasted how China is approaching this. John and I were in China 2 years ago, and so we saw this firsthand, versus what we're doing in the U.S. And I would characterize China's approach to the smart grid as the old AT&T monopoly model. They basically got one entity, State Grid of China, that has a 20-year plan, and they don't have to have large groups reaching consensus, regulators, regulated entities. They just decide what they want to do and they do it. In the U.S., we were down that road in telecom, and we decided to go a different road, which was the right choice. But even if we wanted to, we could never do that because we have this diversity of IOUs, we have munis, we have rural co-ops. The needs are very different regionally. The structures are very different. In the southeast part of the U.S., when you're paying 8 cents a kilowatt hour and reliability is good enough, what's the driver for change? So. So this is going to be very complicated, but I think, John has an excellent point. We do need some overall vision, to guide us, and that vision is going to continue to evolve. A few years ago when we went to these conferences, we weren't talking about the Internet of Things. and now this is painting a whole new opportunity for us. So I think we need to continue to have ways to get together, share common problems and insights, and develop this common vision. And in the U.S., we're very good at that. So
yeah, thank you, thank you. Raiford, you've been some panels and spent some time with us. What do you think? ETS 2014, 2 days.
Yeah, it's been a great conference. Thank you for inviting me. I think the thing that strikes me is that the conference is asking the right questions, right? And that we're going from a world where everything is siloed to a world that is an integrated ecosystem. And that process, that path is bumpy. It's confusing, and nobody has it really figured out well. And so we need dialogues like this to really figure out that path. And for me, that's been my biggest takeaway, is hearing everyone's perspective on what their portion of that they're helping overcome, and in turn trying to fit that into what we're doing at Duke.
Yeah, absolutely. Jamey, you embrace and represent one of the most trend-setting, perhaps controversial companies in so many ways, but you are a stakeholder. You own a lot of generation. You own retail. You own disruptive things. ETS, 2 days. What do you think?
Well, I think it's been a great conference to really highlight entrepreneurship. I think that's the thing I've really seen come under a lot of focus, and I think that's the thing we have to look forward to, whether it's in the utility space or the power sector, or however you want to characterize that space. I think that's the real opportunity that I see coming out of this. Is I heard a lot of entrepreneurial ideas and talked to a lot of entrepreneurs who have fascinating ways that hopefully they'll be changing the way we think going forward. And I also learned that if I want to have more cell phones than the WAS, the number is 11.
Thank you. Doug, you also have been in many conferences, and you and I have been on stage many times. And, ETS, 2 days, what do you think? What's your takeaway?
So I echo a lot of the sentiments that were shared. I did have 3 observations, and I think some of them already been mentioned. The first observation is, to your point, we've been to a lot of these things. And I think the ideas are beginning to really evolve more and more. I know that we tended to talk about specific things, whether it's a storage or DR or DG, as if it stands alone, right? I've always felt that the hardest challenge that we have is integrating all of these things to find the optimal mix of things to deliver value, right? Storage is not always the right solution. DR is not always the right solution. There's a right mix of things. Tough thing to do. Second observation is sometimes in a setting like this, we tend to just talk about technology or technical solutions or systems, and we forget that there are people on the other side. DR, right? A lot of people are having angst about, well, where is it? We are not doing a really good job, right, in engaging people to get really interested. Technology-wise, we've already done things like through clouds, integrating all that works, right? And the third piece is a lot of these things when people talk about DG, especially in the industry that I'm in, people get a little paranoid. It's like danger to our business model. We tend to think a little differently. We think on balance, this is a good thing for us. There's a lot of opportunity for making grid more flexible, getting better quality engagement with the customers. And the last thought is that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not we win and somebody loses or whatnot. I think there's an opportunity for a win-win thing that we should really be looking at.
Right. Karl, we've known each other for a while. We've been in many battles. I eventually left you in 2010. I see you're doing really well running electric vehicles and emerging technologies at Austin Energy. 2 days in Austin at ETS. Have we done a good job representing? And what do you think?
I really enjoyed the format. To use Steve Wozniak's formula on happiness equals smiles minus frowns. And I really think there's been a nice amount of smiles just in the music. I think now my new checklist on conference, well, where's the music venue on the side as well? But it does help with the learning experience. So congratulations to yourself and Zpryme and the good folks here at the Paramount, fantastic. And really my main takeaway is and continues to be is everyone has a strength, and we need to play to folks' strengths. And everyone who signed up for an Energy Thought Summit, you have something to contribute. Let your voice be heard, and then again, also listen to others, because that's the only way we're going to solve these big problems.
Yeah. Well, to me, really, it's to thank you all for being here, for having said yes to come here. But it's because it's really the fact that we're all in it together, all the stakeholders, right? Telecom, power, policy, consumer electronics, computing, cars, so on and so on. And the fact that you're all here, I think that's what really makes the difference. So now is the time to maybe single out something, John, and everybody will follow your lead on this. Did you learn anything new at ETS? Any technology, any solution, any business model? Did you meet a new company? Is there anything stand out? It's time to be, kind of single out somebody or something. Is there anything at all?
Well, I think on my own panel, just talking to Doyle and Larry and what they're doing, I learned that, utilities are continuing to embrace new technology in ways that we would never expect. And the result of that has had some incredible impacts on driving down costs and driving up adoption rates. Mm-hmm. And so, I learned, I think, that things are happening even faster than I actually believed they were and are going to continue to happen. And it will continue to expand that way, I think, because of the quest for utilities to, number one, serve their customers, and number two, ensure that they can provide that service at a reasonable cost, but also reliably as well.
Yeah, thank you. George, any new technologies, companies, solutions, business model, anything, anybody you bumped into, met that kind of, wow?
Well, a lot, but one thing that struck me was, if I could share an anecdote, in 2009 when I started work on the standards part of this, Stephen Chu, who was Secretary of Energy at the time, grilled me and said, when are the standards going to be done? And I said, never. Never. And, I was right. So there's still a lot of work to do. But it's like the internet. I mean, the internet's been around for 40 years. The technology continues to evolve. So this is an ongoing thing. I think we've set up mechanisms to work it. Never fast enough. But,
right.
But the technology and the economics are going to continue to drive things. And so we need to have a, process that will keep up with the technology.
Sure. Raiford, I don't know if you have any insights in ETS and anybody, any company, any technology, any business model, a conversation. Maybe it's a new deal with somebody or anything at all, anything exciting that you found out at ETS?
Sure. I'd like to do my interpretive dance version of that, but I think I'll save it for later after I get some alcohol. That being said, no, I really do appreciate the dialogue. Actually, I find that getting up here and talking is one thing, but it's really the conversations you have in the hallway. It's the conversations you have in the back room that introduces you to people who think differently and really gets you outside of your normal comfort zone of everybody in group think that tends to agree with you when you're back at your own company. I think for me, the biggest and the most important thing I've discovered here is really just seeing so many other people interested in the same kind of objectives. For 3 years, I've been at this at Duke, and it's been a lonely 3 years as we attempted to do things with interoperability and distributed intelligence and distributed optimization. And while Duke has always prided itself on being on the forefront of this, you get down to the tactical folks that actually do the day-to-day. It's a very different world. So in that sense, it's great to be here to see and hear similar thinking that we've been trying to champion within the company.
Okay. Jamey?
Well, I think I'd like to get you a drink, first of all, because that sounds like maybe the most fun part of this panel. I think the one thing that really stands out in my mind is Dr. Amin threw up a visual that was really compelling to me. And it was this visual where he first threw up where you could see all of the lights, this great power graphic where you could see the lights, and you could tell, what areas of the globe were lit up and what areas weren't. And then the graphic that followed that was this wonderful graphic that showed gross national product. Mm-hmm. And it really, for me, illustrated so poignantly how incredibly important this work on the grid we do is, because it really is that closely tied with not just the economics of a country, but how they also improve their social health and welfare.
Right.
So I think that was just such a lovely and poignant way to portray that. I'm really grateful to him for doing that.
Great, great. Doug, anything that sticks out in your mind about ETS, a conversation, a product, a company, anything?
You know, events like this, there are always some surprises, right? Things that you haven't thought about. I mean, to his point, you know, people have a lot of smart folks in various different parts of the organizations, different groups. But we tend to think about it based on our anchor point, our perspective. My folks tend to think about it in a big system way, right? And, you know, sort of how do we spread this across 50,000 miles, right, square miles? And when I hear some of the ideas that people talked about, some way, especially, you know, on the customer side, about the way to use some of the social medias and whatnot, so things that we wouldn't normally think about. Those always give you that spark of inspiration to go chase that down to see where there's really something there. So you always walk away with some of those things.
Great, great. Karl, time to plug, shameless plug somebody, the musicians in Austin, anything. What ETS 2 days, anything stands out?
I'll always plug Austin musicians. I live in the 78704, and that's a zip code in South Austin.
Woo!
And so it is the core of the Keep Austin Weird, and they're the demographic that they have more people on the census that claim the occupation as musician per capita than any other place in the U.S. So I'll be happy to support my neighbors on that. I think really what I learned, or a lot got validated, is there's surprisingly a lot of agreement on the big issues and even on the big solutions. I think what I like about coming to these conferences and getting that stack of cards and following up is different perspectives how to tackle that. So learning things like what California is doing from a policy perspective on storage. Well, that's interesting. Well, now how that's happening. And so, I think there's a general consensus on the ideas, and what I get is the more tactical ways of, well, really, how are you going to do that, and how does your product do that? And so that's the part I like.
Right, right. Well, I would say that for me, it's a lot of things, but I think Waz being on stage and sharing with us his views or his perceptions as an engineer about energy and clean and the cost and all that dynamic. I know a lot of people didn't like it. A lot of people found it very refreshing. But the interesting thing about his perspective as a luminary, as a godfather of computing, is that is his perspective. So that means for those of you who are challenged by his lack of sensitivity to whatever you guys think that he should be sensitive to, is that we're not doing a great job selling that. We're not doing a great job as an industry coming across with the value prop, because some of these luminaries who write big checks to create companies and push forth some direction, maybe if they're not on board, we're not doing a great job. And that to me was one of the big eye-opening things about it, because we tend to drink our Kool-Aid, if you will, because we're in the industry and we believe all these things. But 99% of the population in the United States and in the planet doesn't know, right? So we got long ways to go. So changing into solutions and perhaps being provocative, can you share a few things to change, maybe 3 things to change in the industry, and what that future looks like? And we'll start with John, because he has this incredible framework to think of this. And we have had some phenomenal conversations. And I want to thank John now, take a moment publicly to thank you for his service, because I think as a FERC chairman, he did a phenomenal job, an outstanding job, above and beyond in many ways. And the country is way better off today than it was when you took over, John.
Thank you.
So tell us, what 3 things should we change, John, and what does this utility of the future look like? And you alluded a little bit when we had the panel with Larry and Doyle.
Well, the first thing we need to change, I think, is we need to give consumers more choices. Mm-hmm. Consumers have to have the ability to access real-time prices and respond to those prices if they want to as a choice. Consumers have to have the choice of distributed generation, and they do have that choice, and they're voting with their wallets to take that choice once every 4 minutes in this country, which is phenomenal that you think people are actually putting on distributed generation once every 4 minutes.
It is.
So choice, I think, is the first thing that I would change, more choice for consumers. And then I think the other side of that, second thing, is more competition. We ultimately need to have a more competitive system, both at the wholesale level. We need to have more organized wholesale markets across the entire country. I know, one of your sons of Texas here tried to do that across the country, Pat Wood, one of my predecessors. He tried to put something, one of those words that is not spoken at FERC anymore, standard market design, but he tried to put in place a uniform wholesale market across the country, and it would have been a good thing, in my opinion. But unfortunately, there were areas of the country that didn't want that choice, I guess. We could put it from that perspective. But in any case, we need to have, I think, a stronger competitive wholesale and a stronger competitive retail market. And then I guess the third thing that I'm struggling with is that I'd like to see done, number 3, is even where you do have competitive retail markets, like in Texas, for some reason, they don't seem robust enough. In other words, consumers here don't have the choice to access real-time prices. They don't have the choice to bundle, and maybe I'm wrong, if anybody knows more about the Texas market, please tell me, but they don't yet at least have the opportunity to bundle with that retail choice, distributed generation, efficiency, demand response options, and those things should all be bundled together in those retail choices as well. So those are the 3 things that I'd like to see, and they all revolve around markets and how to make the markets more efficient, make them work better, and make them work better for consumers to lower costs, but make them cleaner at the same time.
Okay. George?
Well, let me try 2 things. I'm a bit brain dead after being on 3 panels today.
You've added the panels.
Yeah, so one thing that occurs to me is I think we should stop wasting time talking about, are the utilities going to be dead?
Right.
I think there's consensus that it's going to be a hybrid, right? There's going to be a lot more distributed generation for resiliency, moving to microgrids. There's, at least now, in my lifetime, there's not going to be any alternative to the wires going to buildings.
Right.
And I think the regulators have demonstrated that they understand the business issues. So the regulation will evolve to ensure that this all continues to deliver affordable power.
Right.
So that's consensus. Let's move on from there and deal with the more challenging issues. The other thing that I'd like to change, and I think we are changing, is I think cybersecurity will continue to be a growing problem, or, an urgent problem, and we really need to instill sort of a culture of security. I observed in the cybersecurity panel earlier that if you think of quality, quality has undergone a revolution in the last 30 years. If you think back to the 70s and 80s with the US auto manufacturers, quality was crap. Japanese were eating our lunch, but they got it, right? It was a combination of people, processes, technology. There had to be, from the CEO down to the shop floor worker, alignment. So it's cybersecurity is very similar. We're going to get it right, but
Right.
And I think the electric sector is maybe ahead of some other sectors in getting this, but we got to work it.
Good. Raiford, 3 things maybe?
Sure. I think the first one is to eliminate silos. Utilities are notorious for silo thinking and silo solutions, as we need to stop doing that. With that really means we need to have things that are interoperable so that we can make them all play nicely together. That being said, I think the second thing is we need to shift away from a cost-based or a volumetric model to a value-based model. Value-based models, I think, are far more appropriate for customers who demand more choice and more competition out of their grid. It allows for all sorts of innovative pricing, innovative products and services, and frankly, I think it's the only way for utilities to really get beyond being concerned about how many kilowatt hours they sell. Last but not least, I'd like to not forget physics. Physics is one of those things that, at least in my group, is the first thing we test all new ideas against, and if it violates some basic law of thermodynamics, you're pretty much going to chuck it. With that, you can't do physics and forget about economics. And a lot of what we see might actually work physically, but might not work economically. Once again, customers have a variety of needs. It's not all about money, nor is it all about some other value proposition. But we need the flexibility to provide those sorts of things without forgetting what the real world demands or what our customers demand.
Right. Jamey?
Well, I have to echo the comments about competition. I mean, being within RG, if I didn't echo those comments, I would be remiss. But I think one of the things that we really need to get better at is welcoming in people like NIST and Tesla, who are outside of our traditional thought process and our traditional model, but who are coming in with new innovative ideas that really change market dynamics, change how we interact with customers, and really present the opportunity for us to move forward in ways that we hadn't thought about. And I think if we can come more to a place of welcoming those people in and really hoping to get more innovators and more young inventors and companies in like that, I think that will be a huge help for us in moving things forward.
Right.
And then I'd just like to see storage move forward a little bit more. I mean, you talk about the sort of the physics of our market, and the one problem that I've never seen really addressed in my lifetime is this whole issue of, you want the lights to go on the minute you touch the switch, yet those electrons, you can't store them. They got to be made all the time to give you that particular ability. So I'd love to see more progress made in that area.
Right. Thank you. Doug, maybe 3 things?
So maybe on top of my list, given where we are today, just the whole notion of plug and play, right? If you think about internet, if you think about telecom, if you think about consumer electronics, the true creativity and true business value and the customer value got created once we got over that point, right? I mean, I mentioned earlier in one of the panels, remember the days, and it wasn't that long ago. You go to a Circuit City, in fact, buy those internet things, and it comes with a little disc and a manual and a phone number to call if it doesn't work. Yeah, it never works, so you always call, right? We got over that, right? So it's all plug and play, and look at the level of creativity, right? It lowers the barrier, so not the big suppliers, the vendors, but the small ones all participate, apps and things that just create all sorts of interesting things. I like to see that happen in our industry, right? I would love to be able to buy from anybody for my substation equipment, for an example, right? And I think that's just the key success thing that has to happen for our industry. And I guess maybe another thing is some of the things that got talked about here a little bit. It's just the whole notion of, here's a competitive business, and there are utilities, and, it's a zero-sum game. I just don't buy that. I think there are just lots of opportunities given the kind of the things that we're all trying to do. And I guess maybe the last thing is, this whole notion about how the utilities get cost recovery and the structure of it, right? Sometimes it discourages folks to take innovative solutions in our industry. I really like to see that differently, right? There are a lot of really neat ideas, but when you go through this kind of a rate case cycle, whether you have to go and show a 20-year MPV on some new technology, and I'm going, if I were inventing, let's say, iPhone, would I be able to make a positive MPV case for 20 years? Probably not. Right? So things like that, I think, is a very fundamental to the business that needs to change.
Before we go to Karl, if you want to start lining up for questions, now is the time to. Don't be shy. Come on over to the microphone so we can fire it up as soon as Karl is done sharing his 3 things.
Yeah, don't be shy, and just because they're closing the bar early doesn't mean we're trying to get you out of here any soon. I would say, something John mentioned this morning about changing the rules to keep up with the technology really resonated with me. Specifically to Austin Energy, when it was all said and done on our rate case, we hadn't done a rate case in 20 years. That's a long time going without, looking at your rates.
It's a recipe for madness.
Yeah, and so being in the middle of that somewhat, there was a lot more people, Austin Energy, a lot more in that storm. But what I saw was a process as well that it starts off as very science and math and cost of service based, and you have external consultants come in and do this great job. And then it goes through a review process, and then you introduce emotion, drama, and lobbying. And that completely changed it.
In that order.
And it's not negotiated where you think, well, I'm going to ask a little higher here because I know it's going to, it is really comes out of the gate of what they think is the best using science and math, and it completely gets changed from when you add those other components to it. So in one of the sessions, one of our rural CEO utilities was talking about the courage just to have a flat wires rate and put it out there. He said anywhere from $36 to $38 a month to really cover that, but he doesn't have it yet and doesn't think, he's seeing the courage to do that, because it does take courage when you see how the process is done.
All right. Do we have questions?
Is it Doug?
Yes.
So Doug, you were talking about how you'd like to see everybody be able to play together, right? Basically, and so that reminds me of kind of the software industry, and the reason that the software industry is able to be plug and play and be able to everybody to be able to operate together is that they run on a framework, right? So there are these frameworks that everybody can sit on, and that people can write code to and operate on. And so, what's the framework?
Well, so I'll take a crack, but I'm sure you could as well too. There are a number of frameworks that are being developed. Just use cybersecurity as an example, right? There's a framework that is NIST, right? Kind of gives you a very good, solid guidance that you can build and write code to, and that's what we've done. We basically wrote a common service cybersecurity model based on that NIST framework, and we went and found a software vendor that are qualified to do that level of coding. But that's just one example, right? At the end of the day, I think what we are all trying to get to is this whole notion of a system of systems concept, right? Which basically, until now, even today, right, we have all these silo systems that were totally optimized for that single purpose, when in fact, in the future, right, when you start thinking about bringing all these different preferred resources, DR, EE, DG, storage, you name it, kitchen sink, maybe energy efficient kitchen sink, bring it all together, right? That means you got to start having all these systems to work together, right? So again, that goes to the notion of you can't just have a single vendor solution for a single type of a system, different system, and trying to stitch it all together, right? So there has to be a system of systems concept that needs to evolve still.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I would regard the NIST framework as the high-level framework. A lot of the work that's been done internationally is based on it. And moving forward, we've set up the Smart Grid Interoperability Panel as a private sector nonprofit organization to basically carry that forward. So that's what I would point to.
Raiford, you want anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of the technology grew up with, as Doug was saying, with an individual use case in mind. And now as we start thinking about how we're going to optimize the system to really work together, that's something we've discovered that having all those little silos don't work well. And that's really what's causing, I think, a lot of the rethink, and why you see people like Doug and myself up here championing and repeating very often, and probably to much of the detriment and boredom of the audience, but repeating that interoperability is critically important, because that really unlocks all the value, or at least a significant portion of the value that we think can come from the grid.
I would add to your question to help everybody understand the problem, the challenge, right? It can be done at times. There are some things but you're trying to fix four things. The software part is the easy part. Then you have the telecom. Then you have the IT computing component, and then you have the power component. So take, for example, protection relay equipment in a substation. The communication is synchronous, not asynchronous, synchronous. And today it needs to be done on copper because IP cannot handle it. So in the United States, we use TMP3 and Goose because IP cannot handle it. So that is one of the crux of the matter, the challenge, because you're moving electrons. These are not data packets. You're moving data packets to see where the electrons are, but you're moving electrons. So anyway, next question.
Hello, I'm Donna Atanasio. I'm with the George Washington University Law School, and I'd like to take advantage of having all of this brain power up here to help us out with shaping a study that we're working on. You've talked a lot about the need for a vision and the fact that we're all in silos. And of course, one of the silos that we're suffering from is our regulatory system, in the sense that we think about transmission planning at a federal level, we think about RPS at a state level, we think about investment at a utility level. So we really need a place in which we sort of bring all of these things together to create that vision, so that as we make investments at these different levels, we're getting them all into sort of the right framework, and a space where people who are not currently part of the system, such as the providers of rooftop solar or consumer solutions, can come to the table as well. Our approach is we're thinking about it by looking first at integrated resource planning processes as they exist today, and trying to extract from that the pieces that might work to build a new platform. But I'd like to get your thoughts about, is there a way, are there platforms that exist now that we should be looking at? Are there other ways that we can sort of elevate this to a way that you can start thinking about planning and vision on maybe a regional, a geographic system that makes sense?
Yeah. John, do you have any?
That's a ringer question, Donna.
I knew you'd step up to this, John.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. You could have just called me on the phone. And it is the ultimate question. I mean, how do we plan comprehensively all the way down to the local distribution level, to the highest transmission regional grid level, and plan in a consistent, coordinated way? That's really sort of the question. And so, as you stated, there are many states that have integrated resource planning processes, IRPs. I actually wrote the statute for the one in Nevada. And many other states. I think there's at least 20 other states that have that process where they do the state planning. There's other states that are in these RTOs that don't actually do the planning, and a lot of the planning is defaulted to the RTOs, where they do the regional planning, and then the states do sort of at the distribution level, the energy efficiency planning and demand side planning. So what we tried to do with Order 1000 at FERC was tried to help integrate that by having state plans be looked at the regional level as well, to help inform regional planning by RTOs. And also in that order, we've written in there that those regional planning entities should be looking at the demand side as well as the supply side. Now, it's in the order, but whether or not they're actually doing it at a very robust level is a big question. So that's now up to all the stakeholders in those planning processes, and especially those stakeholders who would like to see them more robust and take in demand side aspects of planning, to insist that that planning be done. I think that's a potential model, that if you could expand those regional planning activities, and in fact those Order 1000 regional plans are required throughout the entire country, not just where the RTOs are, and in them have some coordination and collaboration between state IRPs, integrated resource plans, then I think we could get to a point where we have more comprehensive and coordinated planning process. And that was the idea that we were trying to do with Order 1000. Whether it succeeds or not is another question, and it will only succeed as well as the entities who participate in their level of participation.
Anybody else?
I'll add one thing. So as an attorney who runs an emerging technology group, which makes for an interesting combination, I'd say I've noticed two things about integrated resource planning. The first is that it's very deterministic, meaning typically what I see is that people pick 4 or 6 likely scenarios, but they're just based on gut. There's really a whole slew of potential outcomes, and it's really more of a stochastic model, and I don't see a lot of that sophistication in the process. I think the second thing I've noticed through this is that if you think about what makes a good forecast, the first thing is transparency in terms of quality and cost. And that's very difficult to share when there are so many players in our market. And part of what we need, and I believe this is really where FERC was attempting to go, was really to help levelize the playing field and kind of bring us all together under a common set of rules. I'd like to see a lot more work in that area. One, to make the modeling more sophisticated so that we can capture potential upside and downside risk. And two, really integrate the quality and cost better into our modeling.
Can I just do a follow-up there on Order 1000, because it is functioning at a transmission level? Do you feel like it's really getting the state input flowing up into the model as well?
Well, there are states that do participate in Order 1000. And again, it's only as good as those people who choose to participate. Anybody who wants to participate can, so it's a matter of stakeholders having resources and ability to go in and spend time and money to participate. And let me add one other thing to my thoughts on Order 1000. The other real challenge is not only coordinating the federal Order 1000 planning process, regional planning process, with the state IRP process, but the other coordination part that I didn't even talk about is how do you then coordinate all that with the market? What is the market effect on the planning? And if the market dictates that it wants to do something different in the planning, then what happens? And that's the real big challenge, is how do you ensure that you're recognizing market directions and market trends when you're doing the planning necessary for reliability, necessary for economic efficiency, necessary for state public policy. Those were the three things that were in Order 1000. And as you do those, how do we ensure that you're also taking account of what the market's doing with distributed generation, with consumers lowering their load through improved efficiency and demand response? How are those things going to be integrated into that planning process so that the markets don't go one way and the planning goes another, and you end up then with a lot of stranded costs? And that's the big boogeyman for utilities, is they go off and do their planning on their IRP, or we go off and do our planning in the regional transmission organization activities and put in all this transmission, all this generation, and all the consumers say, we don't need it. We have all these solar systems in, we have all these microturbines, we have all this other stuff. We don't need this stuff as much as you've said we need now, and you're asking us to pay for it. That's the real problem.
Yeah, so if I just may add to that point, because it seems to me, I'm not a rate person or lawyer, but just a simply mere act of observing some of these technologies and some of the things that are happening really is beginning to blur the line that used to be relatively clean between transmission and distribution, right? What happened in distribution level never really affected in a big way on the transmission side. But now you start thinking about things like storage. Depending on where you put it, is it a generation device or is it a grid device? If you take the same device and move it over to the transmission side, and then next day you go, I'm going to put that on the distribution side of it. Well, now what happens? Now that you got DG, you got energy flowing back into the transmission. So we don't really have a clear, complex situation understanding. You said stochastic, absolutely, right? These things are all stochastic, right? These are not deterministic, centrally dispatched resources that you plan for day ahead. No, right? So the question is how do you model, because today we model transmission and we model distribution separately. And there is even a good model on the distribution side because it's a pretty simple stuff. We just do a net load and go, there it is, right? Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen. So we're trying to figure out how do you come to an understanding of a really complex, dynamic environment that's much more holistic in transmission and distribution combined. What's the net effect of all these different policies and technologies? I think that's the next big task for the industry.
Yeah. Next question.
Hi, my name is Drew Johnston. I lead a Central Texas Fuel Independence Project here in Central Texas. We are expanding not the carbon footprint.
Reducing.
We're expanding the footprint, but it's of electric vehicles and natural gas vehicles. And we're doing it through informational and market leadership. We're supporting the 10-county region around Austin and San Antonio. And Chairman Wellinghoff, essentially your point was so well met, because what you were saying was the challenge is regional. It is interdependent, interrelated between energy and transportation, the home, the built environment, as well as agriculture, all of our infrastructures across all of them. So how do you play nicely together, right? And so, Mr. Kim, to your point, what you were saying there about the complexity, what we found was Karl Popham led our electric vehicle and emerging tech team on an application, and that was to execute a roadmap that would get everyone on the same sheet music across TxDOT, ERCOT, Railroad Commission, local utilities, all the automakers, get them on board. But we were applying for this originally with electric vehicles, and the intent, DOE came back and said, look, we would like you guys to stick your neck out outside of your service territory, include San Antonio, include your extended region, include, and really include natural gas. And Austin Energy is not necessarily the name that people think of when they think of a natural ally of natural gas. But the real talk is that we have flaring going on in Eagleford, and we can see it at night. And so the question becomes, what are we doing with that and why? And so what we had to do, essentially, was we got $500,000 from the federal government. And I say this because I think I was going to ask you about multifamily and low income, because I think that's a voice that we need to talk about that's very diverse, and they need someone to speak for them. But you said so many things that really got to me, because what we've had to do is we have this bucket of funds, and we are allowed to promote solutions that address hyper-focused pain points, but anything and anyone that has to do with road mapping this. And so we've been able to bring in everyone from chambers and essentially your whole myriad constellation of attributes. Now, because we have these funds, we're able to do projects that they can't do. And what this does is it builds the good faith, George, that you were talking about new ideas need friends. And so you need to get on that same sheet music. And getting them early on in this conversation bypasses a whole standards conversation that is arbitrary and capricious sometimes. You know, just sort of goes where people tell you. Second thing is about 20-year roadmaps. Talking about the iPhone, I think Alexander Graham Bell would be so proud of the innovations that came out of what he did, and I think Thomas Edison would be so disappointed with the electric meter. You know, I think where we are is not a point where we want to be, but we're getting to point B. So my question is, how, as far as regionalism, do we address the whole region when you have new opportunities to tackle these problems in a non-standards and not regulatory approach, but rather in the same kind of way that we see the ratcheting of new startups, right? The fact that Quirky can go from an idea in 2006 to something that has $50 million in patents today. You know, we have these opportunities at our disposal. What can FERC do? What can NIST do? Can we create tiger teams that essentially annihilate the debate? Can we develop those kind of roadmaps that can support this kind of innovation? Not just in Central Texas, but we have now initiatives where we have the whole electric vehicle network is roadmapped out with Bluebonnet, with Pedernales, with UTSA, UT, and all the automakers on board. Now, it just took Austin Energy sticking its neck out a little bit for someone else to start that. Can you guys fund and incentivize that kind of development of groups across the country? Create something along the lines of, I don't know, like sort of what Department of Agriculture has with their extension network. So they have a spot where everyone goes and it's housed at the local utility, but it's for the whole region. You know, I mean, we have to start somewhere, and it starts with an FTE somewhere willing to work with everyone, you know, and be that person. The other point I'll say is multifamily, we have a key accounts person, and I think every utility in the United States should have a key accounts person that deals with multifamily, because we have over 50% of our population living there, and they don't have enough voice. So I want to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew.
Thank you.
Question?
Yeah, just a challenge to the podium. I'm trying to think 300 weeks ahead, that's 2020. And I was wondering if ETS is going to have the conference Energy Thoughts Summit then. Will we see other players in the industry? What I'm thinking of is when you take the analogy from the telecom system and the rising of the internet, we have much more data right now coming through the system, but the money is not earned on the network, but on the services on the network. So basically, we have a next layer of companies. So Google and Amazon, who are providing services globally, make more money than transferring just electrons to the communication network. So I'm kind of asking myself, will we see global companies like Google or something on the ETS 2020, which might be interested in forming the next layer of intelligent energy and probably having arbitrage just a very small fraction of every kilowatt hour to be able to participate in one of the biggest markets worldwide, energy. So are we still missing some of these things and think we are still the club of companies and institutions that we are right now, where we have new global players coming into 2020?
Great question. So Google was here and a lot of other players were here, and I think, but anybody want to chime in and say anything about other players crashing our party?
Yeah, I would say we as an industry will have failed in implementing what should be the vision of the smart grid if we don't have new players. Frankly, I see competition as a great thing for us, and that the revolution that's being enabled with all this data and interoperability should allow disaggregation is a bad word in my industry, but it should allow customer disaggregation in a way that provides more value to the customer without needing regulation to achieve it. And that I see a future with a lot of different participants who can provide services that we can't even dream of today.
So that is happening in our area, by the way. I've talked with all of these folks, right? Google, Microsoft, and today, there's this whole notion about the retail side of the business beyond the meter, right? So, if you recall, Google was trying to get into the market, I guess it was about 3, 4, 5 years ago maybe. But somebody mentioned earlier there are 3,000 utilities with all their back office systems that tend to be closed, and they have no way of accessing the customer data in a consistent, large scale way. So for them, it just made no sense to get into that line of business because Google is a global company. They don't want to have 3,000 exceptions, right, and deal with it. Now, with the smart meters, and I don't know what, 70 million smart meters and growing, right, there is a consistent way to get that customer data. That's why in our state we have a kind of a commissioner ruling that basically says make that data accessible to third parties, and those folks are definitely beginning to look at it now, right? And anybody who has infrastructure, physical infrastructure into people's homes and customer relationships, like cable companies, like alarm companies, they're all interested in this bundling stuff. And energy now is play. So there's no doubt in my mind, just not even 2020, well before then, right? We're going to see a lot of these companies, a lot of these plays, right? So it's going to happen. It is happening.
So the $3.2 billion that Google spent on NIST is basically the entrance into the, smart energy market or part of that?
We'll find out, but you would think that another shoe will drop after that. So let's go to the next question.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, I'm the co-founder of Zpryme and ETS, and we can't thank you enough. Myself, co-founder Jason Rodriguez, attendees from Germany, Switzerland, Netherlands, California, San Marcos down the street. It's you made a lot of dreams come true, both for the attendees and your peers. That you'll see their face on a webinar, you'll Google them, but you never get to see them in person. So you got to share a drink, you got to talk to them in the lobby, and more importantly, you made a connection. I think with Zpryme, we don't want you to think of us as a research firm, but we want to be a connectivity firm. So I think ETS really solidified that for us to bring the people that mean the most to the industry together. But I just want to make an official announcement. Jason Rodriguez, co-founder, and I, along with Andres, we're going to officially announce ETS 2015. And we're going to be hosting it again in Austin, Texas.
Woo! Yeah, baby.
And now to a fun question, and I'll preface by saying approximately 6 or 7 months ago when this was a small conversation we were having in, I believe, at Starbucks, the three of us getting together, let's do this little event, 100 people turn into 500, turn into 1,000, turn into Wozniak and Wellinghoff. We're all here, but shortly after that, we have a publication, Smart Grid Insights, has approximately 50,000 members. We sent a vote out. Who would you want to see out of the entire energy industry keynote and kick off this major event. And unanimous vote was John Wellinghoff, and thank you. I'm not sure if you knew that coming in. Yeah.
It's a good thing I had his phone number.
And then it's another thing to add to with your son that you beat out Steve Wozniak, so join the marquee and beat him out. But number 2 and 3, very close, are Steve Wozniak and Elon Musk. So I want to go around the horn and start with our keynote this year. Who do you want to see next year?
Well, one of my favorites, and somebody that I've not only followed but have a great deal of respect for, is Amory Lovins. So it'd be great to get Amory here, I think, and see where Amory is these days. He's ever evolving, and I like to try to keep up with him and his thoughts on energy futures.
Okay.
All right.
George.
Whoa. Come back to me.
Go back. He's boss.
Yeah, so this is going to be an easy one for me. I always like to see Jim Rogers in action. I think Jim gives a unique perspective, and he thinks outside of the box for having been a CEO of a utility. He, much like David Crane at NRG, they're not confined with how things are done today and how they view the model going forward. I always think those kind of perspectives are good to have in these sort of conversations.
Well, I mean, I kind of have to say David Crane, but but for more than one reason. And the other reason is, the reason I actually joined NRG is I heard David Crane speak. It was very inspiring, and I loved the vision, and it was very compelling. So that was kind of the start of how I became an NRG employee. But I think he'd be a great speaker. I think more of the Google guys would be a great speaker as well. Ask them about that NIST and why they did that.
Wow, this is a tough one. So I can certainly understand like some, real out there innovators and, thinkers and whatnot. Totally get that. But I'm also thinking, maybe just reflecting a little bit about where we are as an industry. Maybe the Secretary of DOE, maybe, because I'm just thinking, we as a company, we got a couple large grants, right, from DOE, and that has really enabled us to do some really innovative things around a lot of the things we talked about as a couple of the ERA projects. Love to hear, his perspective about sort of the federal level, perspective on how successful are we and what more can we do and how DOE might engage all of us too. Because I think there's still a lot of push that has to be done. It's just not going to be all pull, right? So that would be my pick.
My pick, I would say if we didn't get him this time, let's bring him back next time, Elon Musk. And the reason why I'm saying not just what's going on in Tesla and electric vehicles and that as a disruptive technology, it's more about I like understanding how visionaries think. So when you look at whether it's PayPal to how can we secure financial transactions on the internet, when he thinks about whether it's the super tube going down California at whatever ridiculous warp 5 speeds, whether it's commercial space flights and then why we're going to do that and why that's important, and just the thought process of someone and how they think and just that passion and how they go after things and how they look at changing the world within the rules in a lot of ways that exist of capitalism, I think is just very exciting to understand the mindset of someone when they talk about that.
So I'll toss in my idea. Another person to think about is Vint Cerf, who is the real father of the internet. I think, and he has followed smart grid work over the years. And
I have a lot of work to do on my LinkedIn group here, so.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to get his take on where we are relative to lessons that he's learned from the internet's growth.
All right. Well, thank you. We're going to do our best to raise the bar for next year, hopefully fulfill all of those keynotes, and just want to thank you again. Thank everyone that attended. The ones that are left, you understand the vision. The ones that are here, you still understand the vision, and we look forward to seeing you, as the videos say, see you at ETS 2015.
we in a wrap or one? Are we done? Or one more last question? One last question? Is it a question or a plug?
No,
A real question.
We want a question.
I have a plane to
Short
catch.
question.
yeah, very short. Well, energy and technology security means protecting the access and the continuity. So with the energy industry, pretty much we cover both those areas. But with the technology, we focus mainly on protecting the access, unauthorized access. But the continuity, I'm not sure if I have the answer in case the electromagnetic impulse occur, like caused by nature or by human action. And maybe somebody in this panel will have the answer and explain if we're ready for that.
Well,
It's something.
so if I jump into that a little bit, I don't know if there is an answer. As you know, the EMF, especially the ones that are caused by solar, right, activities, that's higher you go up in the altitude, more susceptible you are. That's why Canadian companies were impacted by it when that event happened. For those of us that are sort of on the southern part of the country, it's probably a little less. We worry a little bit more about what happens on the EMP, EMF, based on human actions. There are some things you can do to harden your substations and your transmission grids, right? But it's an evolving thing, right? It's one of those very few events, but potentially catastrophic results. Not frequent events with small results. It's just sort of a different ballgame. I think there is actually federally led effort around
NERC. NERC is
You say
developing
NERC?
standards,
Yeah.
yes.
So I know we are involved in it, a number of other folks are involved in it, but there isn't like, go do this now and then you'll be okay solution.
How about if any explosion, say, in the air above the country?
An EMP,
Will
electromagnetic pulse.
Right.
I
it
mean,
will-
yes, NERC,
it will
through,
create-
under the reliability standards process where FERC oversees this quasi-public, quasi-private entity called NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. That entity, NERC, develops the rules, the standards in essence, and then it sends them to FERC, and FERC then enacts them as rules that are enforceable against the utilities to have the rules do certain things with respect to reliability. EMP is one of the things I know that they're working on. I don't know what the status of it is, but I know that the current acting chairman of FERC is very interested in this issue, Cheryl LaFleur, and she's done a lot on it. And there's also an infrastructure group at FERC and also a reliability group, and I know both groups are working on this. So it is something that they're aware of, and they're trying to develop a rule to then work with utilities and help them figure out how to put in mitigation measures that will minimize the impact from those kinds of events.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, with that said, thank you, everybody. ETS 2014 comes to a wrap. We'll see you here in Austin for 2015.